Banjo-Kazooie is a better game than Super Mario 64. Now I know that's a very controversial opinion. Super Mario 64 is a very beloved game, a classic game, and a truly great game. But Banjo-Kazooie actually kind of one-ups it in a lot of very important ways. So Mario 64 came out in 1996 in America, and it really revolutionized the 3D platformer. It was kind of one of the very first games that actually made 3D platformers work, and had a working camera as well. There were plenty of imitators. Many of them were actually pretty good, like Jak and Daxter series, Rayman 2, Psychonauts. There were some, kind of average games that came out that, took some of that formula. Blinx the Time Cat, Chameleon Twist, Gex games from that era. And there were some not so great games, like many of the 3D Sonic games. Very few games that actually took Mario 64's formula whole hog and really improved upon it. Really kind of outdid Mario 64 at Mario 64's game. And I think Banjo-Kazooie is one of those games. Now it came out later. It came out in 1998 on the same exact platform, the Nintendo 64. So it's very important to note here that Mario 64 is the more important game. It was a revolutionary game. Really can't stress that enough. I am not saying that Banjo-Kazooie would have even existed without Mario 64. I'm just saying it did one better on the formula. One of the most important ways in which Banjo-Kazooie does one-up Mario 64 is that it has better and more interesting level design in general. So Banjo-Kazooie's worlds are often multi-layered, they have more secrets to find, and there's more interaction between the overworld and the individual stages in the game. Compared to Banjo-Kazooie, many of Super Mario 64's levels feel a little bit flat, a little bit sterile. Whereas Banjo-Kazooie, there are secrets in every single world. There are plenty of nooks and crannies you can never get to unless you're actually actively looking for them. And the fact that you learn new abilities as you go throughout the game gives you a richer and richer moveset to actually go about finding these secrets and go about finding sort of new areas to seek out, new things to do. Now with Mario 64, what you see is what you get. Mario begins and ends the game with the exact same moveset. It's a really rich moveset, you can do a lot with it, and the game is perfectly designed around that moveset. But in Banjo-Kazooie, it's really cool that the possibility space opens up throughout the whole first 6 levels of the game because you're just learning new things that you can do. For my money, the best designed 3D platformers are games that give you big, interesting worlds to explore, excuses for exploring them, and really fun and interesting and varied things to do while you're in those worlds. Banjo-Kazooie does this better than Mario 64. Let's go to a couple of really concrete examples here. There's Snowman's Land in Mario 64, and Freeze Easy Peak in Banjo-Kazooie. Now both of these are ice levels, so of course, you're running around on the ice and it's slippery and the physics are a little bit different in both of these. And in both of these worlds, there's a giant snowman that you have to climb up. So they even look a little bit similar. But Banjo-Kazooie has a lot more going on. So in Mario 64, when you climb to the top of the giant snowman, you have to not get blown off. It's a little bit easier in Banjo-Kazooie, but there's also much more of a reward for getting to the top. When you get to the top in Banjo-Kazooie, you get to sort of fly off his scarf on a cool little sled with Banjo, and you save another little bear's life. Just a little bit more interesting. There's a little bit more going on there. There are a lot of nooks and crannies to explore also in Freeze Easy Peak. For example, one of the game's most sort of guarded secrets is actually in Waza's cave, little walrus guy's cave, right in the corner of the level. If you're observant, when you grab your little Jinjo in there, you can see a very secret ice key. You can't get to it. No matter what you do, you can't get to it, but it's there. Now this was actually supposed to be part of Stop and Swap, which had to do with the game's sequel. It was never actually implemented, but if you 100%ed the original game and you played the sequel, you'd have access to all these really amazing, cool secrets, and this was one of them. Just the fact that it's in there speaks to a world where there's a little bit more going on. Put something in that has a sense of mystery for the player. And I think Banjo-Kazooie is richer for having things like this in it. There's a lot more interaction between the overworld and in individual worlds in Banjo-Kazooie. Now, there are animal transformation powers you can use in certain worlds. And you find out that you can actually use these powers in the overworld as well. The overworld is not just sort of this static, flat area where you go to other places from. No, it's actually a coherent world that has a lot of secrets in it and a lot of rewards for those who are very curious and try to explore. One other way in which Banjo-Kazooie really one-ups Mario 64 is in the fact that it actually mixes up some of the gameplay elements a little bit. What I mean by this is that some of the later levels are actually inspired by point-and-click adventure game design, with puzzles that are actually pretty satisfying and interesting, and more fun to do than just, hey, there's an obstacle, get through it. For example, Click Clock Wood, the 9th world in the game, is actually a world where the layout is similar for 4 areas. They're a different season: spring, summer, winter, and fall. You need to do certain things in each season to complete certain objectives. And it all kind of goes along with actual logic and the way time works. Simple puzzles like these kind of go a long way in mixing up sort of the design of the game. So there are certainly platforming challenges in this level, but the fact there are also these kind of interesting puzzles means there's a little bit more variety in what you get to do. And I find that very satisfying. Banjo-Kazooie also has better attention to detail and a whole lot more personality. Now, in terms of personality, your mileage may vary a little bit. Banjo-Kazooie is definitely a game with a lot of googly eyes and characters that you might call sort of Disney rejects. Or perhaps you might find them charming, and I always thought they were very tongue-in-cheek. But they add a lot to the game, actually. They add a sense of specificity and purpose to everything. For example, in the Mad Monster Mansion level of Banjo-Kazooie, every single monster and ghost has kind of a reason for being there in the world. Whether it's a really goofy thing like a disembodied hand that wants to teach you a musical piece, or a disembodied voice that needs an offering in the graveyard. Everything that you're interacting with feels like a character and not just a piece of scripting. Whereas in Big Boo's haunt in Super Mario 64, you never actually kind of get a sense of why the Boos are there, or why things are haunted, or kind of what's going on there. It's just sort of a haunted house, a little bit generic, a little bit flat. I prefer Banjo-Kazooie's approach to having a reason for everything to be there, within the fiction and within this really goofy cartoon world. There's another good example in Shifting Sandland in Mario 64 and Gobi's Valley in Banjo-Kazooie. Both of these are desert worlds. However, whereas Shifting Sandland just kind of feels like a desert level that just sort of has a generic pyramid and, some other sandy kind of elements, Gobi's Valley feels like a weird but interesting place. There are bizarre enemies like giant mummified hands that are trying to crush you. There's a weird sphinx that looks kind of like Banjo and you have to sort of get him to blow his nose. It's weird. It's certainly weird, but it's kind of cool and interesting, and it definitely lends an element of personality to the game. There are a lot of other little things that put Banjo-Kazooie above Mario 64. The overall smoothness of the experience is really second to none in Banjo-Kazooie. Whereas in Mario 64, every time you get a star, you get kicked out of the world back into the overworld, sort of interrupting the flow of gameplay. Whereas in Banjo, you get to stay in the world and just kind of do whatever you were doing, or whatever you want to do. The music and graphics are really something special. The soundtrack from Grant Kirkhope in Banjo-Kazooie is really quite incredible. So Banjo-Kazooie owes absolutely everything to Super Mario 64. Its structure, the style of game, every little thing about the game and the way it was made really owes everything to Super Mario 64. And Mario is certainly the more important and the more revolutionary game. But Banjo really improved that formula so much, with more interesting things to do in its worlds, more interesting level design, and just simply more personality. All the little things and all those big improvements make Banjo-Kazooie the better game overall.